Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
So we're back on. I remember you told me you got to tell that you told an expert story way back. You know, one thing about so I was watching the debate the other night. Every time I'm trying not to talk politics because YouTube is going to flag us for talking politics, but which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But it inevitably comes up.
Wait, YouTube can shut us down?
Yeah, exactly. So I was watching
Man, I feel so vulnerable.
I was watching the vice presidential debate the other night, and as a lawyer, it's important to know how to think on your feet. It's like there's nothing. Probably the most important part of cross-examination, next to preparation, is listening to the answers instead of thinking of what your next question is going to be.
Yes.
And I was a little bit frustrated when I was watching the vice presidential debate. I'm kind of like a politics junkie. I see it as a horse race. This time around, I don't see it as a political horse race, who's going to win, and a fun thing. I really see it as an existential marking point in the history of America, this election. I really do. I mean, I think my daughter was asking me the other day about the Electoral College and what I think about the Electoral College. You know, she's like, how could it be that, Hillary Clinton beat Trump by so many million votes, but wasn't the president? You know, how is it that we have this Electoral College? It's just unfair. And what I was talking to her about, in my opinion, is that I said the framers of the Constitution, first of all, they were all like landowning aristocrats. And they had this whole hunky-dory...
And slave owners in many cases.
Slave owners, of course. And they had this whole hunky-dory thing based on the philosophy of Hobbes and Locke from Jefferson about democracy and all this. And the framers all bought into it, but they were still suspicious of the masses, you know? And when we talk about a certain percentage of the country actually thinks the election was rigged and stolen last time, meaning votes were switched or machines were rigged or whatever the heck it is, and they believe that even though there's no evidence of it. It brings me back to the purpose of the Electoral College as I understood it, which is that the framers were still suspicious of the masses, and they were trying to create a buffer between a charismatic, what do you call like a crazy leader that they call that, I forget, that's very popular, or populist or something, I forget what they call it. But the Electoral College, as I understood it, was invented and put in place to be a buffer between the masses electing their people, so that if a charismatic Hitler type or someone that there would be a buffer, and they say, we don't care what they said, we can't have this person in office, and I think that's that was my take on the Electoral College, and what it's there. The irony is the Electoral College is there to kind of be a buffer and a backstop, so to speak.
Well, remember back at the founding, I talked about the jury earlier. I mean, I think the people who put the Constitution together were pretty brilliant overall, but I don't like the Electoral College. The original vision was that the state government would appoint the senators and that the Congress people would be directly elected. And then a lot of the states, all of them, said, we're going to now start the election of our senators instead of their appointment. So they really became not somebody who the political establishment could trust and give that office to. I mean, like in New Jersey, we've had a lot of luck whenever somebody's filling a vacancy, they do a good job.
Yeah.
And but now whether you like them or not, I mean, anybody with enough money from finance can buy a Senate seat, I mean, J.D. Vance, he was like a tech guy, and then he bought himself a Senate seat. What great. So the Senate no longer serves that function. If anything, it becomes, in some ways, more political than even Congress does,
So when I was watching the vice presidential debate the other night, I was getting frustrated because at one point J.D. Vance says, he says, well, he was explaining something, and he said, He said, I admit my mistakes. That's what makes a great leader, is someone that recognizes they made a mistake, recognizes they were wrong, apologizes for it, and admits that, which was an enormous opening to say, if you're thinking on your feet instead of trying to remember what your prepared lines are, which would have been an enormous opening for Tim Walz to say, that's exactly why, 2 years ago you said he would be the worst president and should be nowhere near the office. I mean, when you talk about that. So thinking on your feet's really important. And I remember you once told me the story about an expert. And you actually looked, he had like a 20-page resume or something. Do you remember that
Oh,
one?
yeah. So I was trying a toxic tort case, one of the first ones, and it was the pollution had gone under a trailer park, and I was representing the people in the trailer park, and the judge gave us a test case with 2 plaintiffs, and I was trying it against a great lawyer near the end of his career, but truly a great lawyer. And, he had a big firm, and I was pretty much solo at that point. I had a couple people, and the local counsel who had gotten me cases were not really helpful in any meaningful way, at least in purposes of the trial. And so, it was just like every day, it's like wave after wave of experts in this. So they had this expert. So it was trichloroethylene was the main chemical, and there was an immunotoxicology issue there, your immune system being affected by this. And so you had this guy, and they put him on the stand, and I'm looking at his resume the night before. It's like literally 600 articles on immunology and allergies, but I couldn't help but notice like about 580 of those were about, it was called pigeon breeder's disease, which is basically an allergy to pigeon shit. And they put this guy on the stand, and he's really smooth, and he's going on, and nowhere is pigeon shit mentioned, okay? It's all like immunotoxicology, and you're the world's leading expert, you've taught at Harvard, you visited Stanford, and blah, 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 blah. So at that point, it was in the 80s, there had actually been a few national panels put together by Department of Health and Human Services on pollution.
This is the expert for the polluters.
Right.
That's testifying that their pollution couldn't have caused these injuries, essentially.
Yes. I'm sorry. That's a good context. So he was there, so I figure my cross-examination, he was a very impressive guy. But one of my tricks, we all have tricks, is if you can get the jury to laugh at an expert, it just takes all that expert stuff away. Okay, this was a time when people took experts seriously, okay? So the first thing I said was, so you're a medical doctor, right? Yeah. I said, you don't really see patients, do you? No. You didn't see any of the plaintiffs that I represent in this neighborhood, did you? No. I said, now there's been a lot of interest in toxic chemicals as a result of Superfund, number of studies. I said, the EPA put together a panel in 1981. You were not invited to sit on that panel, correct? I didn't know if he was invited or not, but he wasn't on the panel. This guy certainly liked to pad his resume. So I go through 3 or 4 of these, because he referred to the work of those panels, You weren't invited on that, were you?
And this is the part of the cross-examination, sometimes they call it expert voir dire, where you get to challenge his credentials or at least poke holes in that he's not as much of an expert as he might hold himself out to be.
Yeah, and very often you get a little bit more latitude on voir dire for expertise than you would on the merits. And so I'm like, okay, I said, I got your resume here. It was like 30, 40 pages thick, more than 20. I said, this is a true and correct copy of your resume. Yes. Okay. I said, let's just go through this right away. I said, I couldn't help but notice that a disproportionate number, 658 of your articles were on the subject of pigeon shit. And I said, is pigeon shit an issue in this case at all? So everybody starts laughing when you say pigeon shit in court. You know, I was a little worried. But even the judge was laughing. He's like a little Santa Claus kind of guy. And, and you know, this guy, nobody ever laughs at this guy. You know, you think he probably goes home and beats his wife. He was like such a tough, he was like uptight, a very uptight guy. And so he's sitting there. So I'm like, well, 658. I said, you want to count them? The juror starts laughing again. He's like, I'll take your word for it. I said, no, you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, this is cross-examination. I said, I want the jury to disbelieve you. So don't tell them I'm a honest guy if you don't think so. Well, I don't think you're very honest. So he starts attacking me, which is good. And so I said, so 658 articles, and in each one of them, you were talking about pigeon shit and how people could be allergic to it, right? Right. So just one more question on pigeon shit. Jurors cracking up again. I said, what was it in the 658th article that you wrote that you hadn't figured out in the first 657 articles, you know? They're like all cracking up. Was there a breakthrough discovery that you had to write one more article? I mean, don't you think like 100 articles on pigeon shit would have been enough, you know? And so he was like pretty upset. Then I said, now, as I figure, you would have had to get 658 articles on pigeon shit in the, 10 years you've been a professor, you'd have to write like, one a week. I said, so you're just sitting in front of a typewriter, it's before computers, and just typing all these little articles by yourself? Like, no. I said, oh, you have research assistants. He said, do you have graduate students who do this? Yes. Well, they assist me. I said, now, come on. You're telling us you're teaching classes, you got a family, and you're the only one who's inputting this? I said, isn't it true that basically all these people are just recycling your article and you're putting your name on it with them? No. All right, that's not true. I said, so tell us in lay terms that we can all understand, what was the breakthrough in Article 658 that you hadn't figured out before? And he couldn't really explain it. I mean, I don't think he even remembered it, even though it was his last pigeon shit article. And so then I start to turn around and start walking back to my desk because I figured the job was done. And I stopped. I said, wait, I have one more question. Isn't it true that recently you've begun to shift the focus of your research? Yes. That's a rat urine allergy, isn't it? I said, you've now published 22 articles on rat urine. The jury's like cracking out. They think this is like the greatest thing ever happened to them. It's like, oh, we thought it was going to be a boring day. It's like, this guy is like, because the other guy was just like, he reeked of arrogance. I mean, he was perfect in a sense, but he was also imperfect. And once I got the jury laughing at him, he just really started acting up in a bad way. So I said, when you're talking about rat urine allergies, and then the other guy jumps up and like starts screaming because he realized I've hurt this guy badly, and he's like, well, rat urine, that's irrelevant to this case. Yeah. I said, whoa, judge. He made a point of saying this guy had published over 700 articles, okay? Yeah. The juror has a right to know what those articles are about. And the judge said, well, don't get excited, Mr. Kenner, but you're right. I'll deny that objection. And so I said, so let's talk about rat urine. Has that been a big problem in society? And I said, can we also agree that while you've been very busy, maybe unrealistically busy to think you're doing it yourself, but let's assume you've been doing this yourself between the pigeon shit and now your newfound interest in rat urine. I said, is it true you've never written an article on TCE and you've never been invited to speak at a conference or appear in a conference where TCE has been involved? Is that true?
The pollutant chemical in the case.
Yeah, and he said, yes. Well, I said, I guess we have nothing to talk about anymore. Yeah. Jurors are laughing, and he wouldn't get out of the chair. Like, I think he thought the other guy would get up and like try to rehabilitate him.
Yeah.
But he realized what a disaster it was, and so he just is sitting there, and the judge is like, "You can go now," and the guy's like looking at the other guy like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You can't let me leave like this."
Wow.
Yeah, that was a good day. That was, keep your eye on the ball, and people are always trying to make something out of nothing. Like in the natural resource damage cases that we tried, I remember there was this guy. They have, you can look at some pretty polluted places, and invasive species will grow there, and so you can look at a piece of pollution, and it can be green. And this guy was trying to say, well, it's green. We're trying a case against Exxon at Bayway, and they're like, well, look, it's
That's the Bayway refinery in Middlesex County, New Jersey,
Right,
right
right.
on the Raritan River.
And this guy was like, so the expert's like, he starts out with the green pictures on direct exam from the defendants, like, oh, look how great it is, lush. That was his word. So, and he made a big deal out about being a professor. I think Clemson or someplace you shouldn't really send your kid to, but because this guy. So he's like, so I'm like, well, wait a second. You say you teach graduate students? Yeah. I said, do you teach them to keep detailed notes of where they are, what they're doing, their measurements, all that? It's like, yes. I said, that's pretty fundamental scientific research, yes. And is it fair to say that you didn't take a single note here or produce a single note in discovery? Yeah. He's like, well, I marked it on my pants. I said, oh, you took a magic marker, like as you walked through it, and you made marks on the height of the growth. No, I didn't mark up my pants. I mean, I just remembered, like this was, and he starts tapping the side of his leg. I said, could you stand up and show me where exactly on your leg? So now he's standing up and tapping it. And I said, and you think that's a better system than writing it down? And I said, as a matter of fact, the reason you wrote nothing down is because you knew I was going to cross-examine you, right? He's like, well, that's not the whole reason. Yeah. I said, oh, is this the rest of the reason defense lawyers told you not to keep notes? So we do the whole methodology thing for a while. And then I said, like, well, all right, let's talk about these invasive species and the pollution. He says, is it your testimony that this is 100% fully functioning ecosystem now? No, I'm not saying that. I said, would you agree that there are no crabs here? I mean, crabs, apparently, the pollution kills them off. Right, no crabs. I said, in fact, the benthic community, the stuff that lives in the soil, that's only the stuff you would see in polluted areas. Isn't that right? Yes. And I said, and would you agree that these are not the species that were there before? Oh, yeah. I said, so what was there before has been damaged, right? You could say that. It's just these people. But I think the best thing was, like, once its methodology was getting in a car, going to the Newark airport, flying back to South Carolina, then sitting down and typing straight with no drafts, no notes, his entire report based on measurements he had taken on his leg. I said, that was your methodology. And he said, he's like, yeah. And even the judge was like, how do you remember all that? And he couldn't really explain how he remembered all that. But he had over 120 different measurements. And it was all based on his leg and the spots.
Yeah, which the obvious thing is that they were hiding it, that they were hiding the notes, they were hiding the stuff because they didn't want you to see it.
And, but it was interesting that they thought that they could, so my tagline, for closing was appearances can be deceiving, right? It looks nice, but nothing lives there.
I remember that when we did the Ciba-Geigy litigation, we did it together, again with John Keefe and your firm. That was a pollution case in Toms River, New Jersey. And I remember I was in warehouses at the plant reviewing documents, and it was just shocking to me. I mean, again, I was a new lawyer there. I was probably 3 or 4 years out of law school, And I remember reviewing documents where they had actually planned to put this plant in Toms River, New Jersey, because it's a sandy soils. It's the Pine Barrens area, and there's sandy soils. And these old memos I saw said that that's why they put the plant here, so that they could dump the dye wastes and all, and it would seep into the soil, and that's how they would get rid of it, which of course would pollute the groundwater. And I remember when Ciba-Geigy became a Superfund site in Toms River, and we were reviewing, not only were we reviewing documents, but we were reviewing like VCR tapes. We'd put these tapes in, and as this was a big controversy in the Toms River area, there was big cancer clusters of people getting cancer from benzene, and chlorobenzenes was the different allegations in the case. I saw these videos that they put out, and there was this one video that the company, the alleged polluter, put out. It was called "The Good Neighbor," and it talked about how this alleged polluter, right in the middle of the Toms River community, was a good neighbor. And they would have pictures, and they'd video foxes running around and deer running around the remediation pipes. And meanwhile, there was, drum disposal areas where it's crazy. Have you seen a lot of that in your career, where, like, the whole public relations thing? How does the whole public relations thing work out in terms of if there's a polluter in a community, and the different things that you've seen in terms of the propaganda that's put out to say that this is all okay, so that people don't do anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very excellent point. You see a lot of it. I mean, I remember a couple decades ago, all of the lying by the tobacco industry started coming to light. And I thought, man, those are some sick puppies.
Yeah.
And then
that's where they were trying to hook the kids, get them hooked on cigarettes early, because then because the old clients were dying off from lung cancer, so they had to get the new one. So they did the Joe Camel and made it a cool thing.
Right. But then you get into PFAS, the forever chemical, and they're using the same public relation firms. Wow. And they're doing the same thing. It's like, if we are loud enough, there's a great book, I forget the name of the professor who wrote it, but it's just, it's the doubt industry.
Right.
If you can raise a doubt, that'll shut down.
It's called "Their Product is Doubt" or something.
Yeah. That shuts down the regulators.
I have it on my bookshelf in the other room.
Okay.
Doubt is their product, I think, is the name of the book.
Exactly. And then they talk about 5 or 6 or 7 different industries which have done the exact same playbook over and over again. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, though my favorite hot document was in that the pigeon shit case. I found a document from 1954, and it was in California. And Melvin Belli, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was a very famous trial lawyer. He was the first guy with demonstrative evidence,
right.
And like he would.
I thought it was Ross Perot with his charts. There was someone before that.
He learned from Melvin Belli, and this memo was, God forbid a Melvin Belli style lawyer ever finds out what we're up to, period. And I found this document. I'm like, this is great. This is like the best thing that ever happened. But no, generally they're telling the public just the opposite, because every day that they can keep selling cigarettes or let their pollution leach through, the sands of Jersey is another day of profits. And once a lot of these corporate people don't think long term. They're not Exxon people are worried about, what's my quarterly profit? Will I get a bonus at the end of the year? They're not saying, what's going to happen in 15 years when somebody turns around and sues us for this? Because they'll either be in a new job, or they would have been retired with, lifetime pension and whatnot. There's something about the corporation that makes it very difficult to get people to act reasonably like they would in their own home. I mean, actually, I remember one year California passed a law. This was after my trial, but they said whoever signs off on these environmental documents that things are okay, if it's wrong, you can go to jail.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty good, because the guy who's like the environmental manager, he's not making enough money to go to prison. Okay,
Right.
the CEO is, and they spend all. I tell you, it's like it's crazy. They spend millions and millions of dollars studying pollution in this country. And the reason they do that is if you hire a consulting firm for, say, $500,000 a year to write a report to the state DEP or Department of Environmental Protection, but your liability is maybe $1 billion to clean it up and restore the property. You're making money every year. You're writing reports and dragging it out, and people wonder, why does it take 18, 20 years to finish studying a site to actually do anything?
Right.
And it's like it's a scam, basically. They're like, oh, we got independent experts who are looking at this, who are helping delay the inevitable of us having to pay for this, or we're going to wear you down and you're going to accept a compromise because people are going to be so upset with you for not having resolved this pollution problem, and it's going to be a big deal. I think that's a real shame, but unfortunately, the Department of Environmental Protection doesn't have the resources to just call people on it or to do it themselves.
Right.
It would be, I never understood why a legislator didn't say, look, instead of letting people run their own investigation, which is really like asking a criminal to investigate the scene of the crime, it's like, oh, Al Capone, how much did you steal from the bank? I'll get back to you with that. I got to study it some more.
Yeah.
I don't know why they don't just say X dollars goes to the government and let the government do the investigation. I think it'd be a good thing, but people don't trust government with too much money. It's like they're always like, oh, there's waste and abuse, and they can tell a story. I mean, it all goes back to what we do as trial lawyers. You got to have a story, and Doubt is their product is all about storytelling and creating this illusion. Like, right after 1954 at Plaza Hotel, all the tobacco executives gather, they start their conspiracy. They all knew unequivocally, 1954, this is what causes lung cancer, this is dangerous product. Footnote, lung cancer was very rare before the advent of cigarettes. I mean, people don't really inhale pipes or cigars.
Right.
And then once they cured the tobacco and made it inhalable, suddenly there's an explosion of lung cancer in Germany, in Europe, in the US. And so they knew. And what they decided to do in 1954, which is really, in some ways, bold, was we are going to set up health panels to study tobacco. So in other words, we're the people who are going to bring you the straight scoop. And oh, by the way, we don't market to children, never market. We have a code of conduct that would make that, illegal. And meanwhile, you're watching these Joe Camel ads go by and you're thinking like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Don't market to children.
Did you have any mentor? I mean, it's again, I just find it fascinating that you came out of Harvard Law School, put up your own shingle essentially. Most people that get involved in class action, they start, big cases, environmental pollution, they start off as a young lawyer in a big firm and someone mentors them where they show them how to do it. They teach them the craft, much like an apprentice would learn from a carpenter or that kind of thing. Did you have anyone, like, did you go to CLEs or like, how did you, CLEs, continuing legal education? Like, did you, because you didn't have any, you were never at a firm where there was someone older, more experienced than you showing you. So how did you learn how to do all this? Like, come up with such a, ingenious cross-examination of an expert with 20 pages about pigeon excrement.
Oh, you're just jealous. You didn't get that guy. I did a couple of things, both, AAJ and Pennsylvania and Philadelphia and New Jersey associations of justice. I think they were called something else back then. We're a great resource to a young lawyer in terms of what you could learn by talking to people, listening to people, even if they were talking about some stuff you didn't quite understand because you didn't have enough experience. I did take a trial course. What's that? It's I guess Temple Law School put it on. It was like a 2-week course. You do a week, and then you come back in like 6 months, like after you've had some more experience, and then which was very good. I forget who sponsored it, but so I remember before I could really afford it, I would go to these conventions, and I tried to listen as much as possible. I tried to tell people what I was working on and get their input and feedback. And, in a way, I was learning from people. Like one guy I learned a lot from was Fred Barron, founding partner of Barron and Budd, made a fortune doing plaintiff's asbestos cases. But then I started talking to him about some of my environmental cases, and he started getting into environmental cases, did a big lead case in Dallas, did a radiation case in the Pacific. And, the interaction was very helpful to me. The judge I clerked for, he didn't give me advice on cases as much as sort of more generic advice while he was still alive. And I guess I would talk to people a lot. A lot of times people will say, when I was younger and I go into a meeting very often that involved work, I would talk and act like I had the total solution to everything. But actually, I spent a lot more time listening to people. As I got older, I learned, okay, you can be the last guy who talks at a meeting, Yeah. But I think people think that maybe I just knew it or thought I knew it all. But I actually listened a lot to people, and I would ask them hard questions. Well, like for example, I was good friends with a fellow named Ron Motley who's passed away. He's a very famous lawyer. He did tobacco cases. He did asbestos cases. And I was like, well, did you ever lose an asbestos trial? He's like, oh yeah, I lost the first 7. I said, why did you try the 8th one? Yeah. Was my first question, but and I asked him what he learned from losing and what he had done wrong and how he, got himself to think about it. So in a way, I was developing my own internal language for self-criticism. Yeah. And I got that from a number of people who were very generous with their time when I was young. I mean, Ron wasn't that much older than me. Fred wasn't really that much older than me, but at least they would talk to me. And so at AAJ, I was actually the guy who started. They have an environmental and toxic tort section. Yeah. I was the guy who started that because once I was doing it, I realized that was a niche, but I was also creating a place where people could show up and talk about problems. Right. And then I'd go to dinner with one of the speakers who seemed really interesting or had done something very that I was jealous of or thought was really slick, and learn what they did. But you got to pay it forward. So people say, why did you spend so much time teaching? Why do you talk to young lawyers? Like people email me, I've got a question about this or that. And I always make the time or try to make the time because I remember I wouldn't be where I was if other people hadn't given me their time,
Yeah, I remember when I started my own firm, when I left the prior firm, I think it was back in 2010, one of my first trials and the new firm, it worked out real well. And I remember I called you on it. I was really excited, and you took the time to talk to me about it, and you were really encouraging. And I thanked you because I thought that a lot of that success or gave me the confidence came from just working with you on cases. It's not like you and I spent a ton of time together. You're mentoring me. But just working on cases together and seeing how your firm does things was super helpful to me.
I remember you doing that trial and calling. I do remember that. It was like, it's a big deal when you finally have your own firm. You're
Yeah.
paying your own overhead.
Yeah.
You're in trial. It's like, okay, I got to pay some light bills
Yeah.
here.
And the case, it actually went to the state Supreme Court because it was a construction injury case where a trench collapsed on a worker and injured him. And the judge got rid of comparative negligence, meaning the jury, the judge wasn't going to let the jury blame the worker because it really wasn't his fault. And the defense took issue with that, and they brought it up to the Supreme Court. And we ended up winning that issue in front of the New Jersey Supreme Court, which made new law to make it much harder to blame workers in construction injury cases. So a lot of good came out of that too. And what you said too about helping people and kind of being there for you, I can attest to that too, because I was on another trial less than a year ago, and I was in the middle of the trial. We got a good verdict, and it was moving to a punitive damages phase. And I had done a prior trial dealing with punitive damages, but this was like at a different level. And I called you, and I think I called you at like 8 o'clock at night or something. You actually picked up the phone, and I could go in the other room there. I got about 4 pages of notes about how to handle a punitive damages trial. And the second person I reached out to, which was gracious with his time, was Rick Friedman. And I think I emailed him at the office or something, and he's been another.
Rick Friedman went to law school with me.
Yeah, he's an amazing lawyer, writes amazing books, like really, really good.
I like his Rules of the Road book a lot. I use that, but I was kind of doing it anyway.
Right.
I mean,
that's kind of where I was getting at. I was talking to Oscar during the break, and I'm like, Oscar, how do you think this is going? He's like, Allan's smart as you know what. I mean, you could just tell. And that's kind of what
I slipped him a $5.
You did? Okay. Yeah. That's what I thought. But yeah, no, it's just fascinating. He said Oscar's smart as heck, and I went to law school, and both of us feel kind of dumb when we talk in front of you.
To me, it's really interesting that you have you have the Chief Justice was in our class, but you also have a couple of really good trial guys, like Rick Friedman's, like I would say, near the top of the heap nationally.
Yeah.
I think he originally started in Alaska. Now I think he's in Washington State, and all of his books have been great. And that's the thing, is like you have to develop, and reading those books and talking to those people helps you develop your own sort of guidance system, like an internal criticism. Like I realized when I read his book, Rules of the Road, I was like, yeah, I do this. I try to box people in.
Yeah.
But he sort of took it to the next level of analysis, and it certainly is the case that I can barely think of a case where I haven't tried to take all their experts and at least get some acknowledgments. Yeah. And the great thing is, it's almost more fun when they refuse to admit something really obvious.
Yeah.
It's like, he's writing in his book, he's like, like they got to admit this is a safety standard. The sign said 55 miles an hour or whatever. And they're like, so you'd agree it's 55 miles an hour? Well, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
It's even better, because
Yeah.
jurors will sit there like, are you kidding me? Or the judge,
Yeah. I was reading Governor Jim McGreevy's book, and it's a fascinating page turner. And the book's called Confession, which is you could have a whole class on all the things that he addresses in there with politics and all this stuff. One of the things he brought up was during his term that because he took over as governor when there was a big budget shortfall, and he talks about what they did to make the budget without raising taxes. And one of the things he talked about is all the money they brought into the state with natural resource damages. And would you want to tell us a little bit about your experience actually doing cases in New Jersey and your involvement with trying to get money back to the state of New Jersey for polluters?
Yeah.
From polluters? First,
I will say I owe a real debt of gratitude to Governor McGreevy, or former Governor McGreevy. So in America, in the 1980s, when Superfund was first passed, and New Jersey had a spill act the year before, Florio was a big pusher of that, and then he sort of took it to Congress for the Superfund bill, former Governor Florio. The laws were written that included not just site remediation, and by site remediation, it's the cleanup or the reduction of toxicity to safe levels. It's all about risk management. You can do nothing to property, put up a barbed wire fence and say, no one allowed, and put some dogs in there, and that could count as a site remediation, assuming that it's not still migrating off-site through the groundwater or something, okay? So you have to understand site remediation is risk management, but everybody who wrote the laws, Spill Act and Superfund, realized that you want to restore natural resources to the pre-pollution condition, okay? But nobody had done that before McGreevy, in large part because they didn't have the resources. They were strapped, and it was like triage. Okay, what are you going to do? Deal with this situation where pollution could be contaminating this neighborhood, or take this thing which is under control and restore it to pre-pollution levels. And so McGreevy had Brad Campbell as commissioner and
Of the DEP.
DEP, and he and I had talked a bunch about natural resource damages when he was working in the Clinton White House. I think he had been the Region 3 administrator, but I think he was also in the CEQ, the Environmental Council there. And so next thing I know, he's appointed and he's calling me. And the governor was very supportive. And the money we brought in through natural resource damages is great. I mean, so many parks have been created in the state with that money. So you destroy, say, a piece of property, let's say Bayway or whatever, that money, I think it was like $250 million that Exxon ended up paying, can go to building parks in Newark, the Newark area, and people can enjoy them. And, one of the things that makes America great compared to the rest of the world, and I think everybody would agree with this, is we have tremendous natural resources. And the thing is, during the period of industrialization and the chemical age, we destroyed a lot of those resources, and we need to restore them because it's incalculable value over time. I mean, a couple of years ago, maybe a decade ago, we were all worried about water shortages in New Jersey, right? Well, a lot of the groundwater was contaminated. We started getting that cleaned up. And, natural resource damage is a way of bringing money in to restore irreplaceable resources. And right. I think it was kind of brilliant on his part to endorse what Brad Campbell was doing, and not just endorse it, but push it to the next level. And I think a lot of good has come out of it. I mean, I know personally, on cases I've handled for the state of New Jersey, we've brought in hundreds of millions of dollars to the state. And it's not just, you're going to make a park. You're creating jobs for
Right.
people to work on the park. You're creating opportunities for business people to say, oh, that's a nice location. Let me bring my food truck here. Or let me, whatever. There is a trickle-down effect. And when you look at things like natural resource damages, it really helps communities in profound ways. I mean, now they're also looking at creating these pathways. We have different ecosystems in New Jersey.
Right.
And one of the things is you don't want to roadkill everything.
You can't where they can never get. Yeah.
Right.
You need tunnels under the
Exactly.
under the
corridors.
corridors. Yeah.
And, the money goes for that. Well, what does that mean? It means we have more, wildlife, flora, fauna, wildlife. It's a good thing. I mean, I think in a way, we should try as much as possible to step lightly on the earth because it's not inconsistent with good values and economics to do that. But, the NRD has really helped jumpstart it. It's been very popular as a program. the people of New Jersey voted to add it to the Constitution, to make sure that the money actually gets spent in that way. I will say, so in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, we got like $10 billion all at once. The legislature, in its wisdom, said, we want to take the payments over time. So A, nobody could dig into it for a rainy day fund, and also because realistically, you can only spend so much money at a time unless you have a huge staff. Right. And so nowadays I can fly over the Gulf of Mexico and see like 7 or 8 islands, being filled in and whatnot. And marshes developing and birds and whatnot. But you can see the same thing in New Jersey. I mean, it's really been transformative.
So you're seeing those things in the Gulf of Mexico based in part on what you did.
Yeah. I think we settled in 2014.
I mean,
or so.
I feel blessed each day. I've been able to do. They say do good and do well. And I feel blessed about that. When I take care of people that through no fault of their own get real bad injured. Do you feel that way? Like, you feel like you've been blessed in terms of being able to do this kind of work and flying over and see the fruits of your labor and the fruits of your intelligence? I mean, that's why I asked you. You left Harvard. You could have gone to a big firm and represented polluters and made a gazillion dollars that way. Like, what can you say about your?
Or become an alcoholic, depressed lawyer in a big firm
that's
doing the devil's work.
Listen, Rick Friedman. I think one of his kids went to Harvard or something, to the law school. And if you Google it, you can Google Rick Friedman law school speech or whatever. And he spent an hour talking to I think it was his daughter or his son's class at Harvard or Yale, one of the Ivy Leagues law school. And his pitch was basically, come join us. He's talking about that there's a cultural war, there's a cultural battle between, like you talked about in your experience with Exxon, about they're just looking at profits and what are the profits going to be. And when, corporations, there's a lot of good in corporations. It helps you to organize capital and organize resources and everything. But the problem is that in the calculus of a corporation, there's no human values are not part of the calculus. Love or, pain or beauty. And he talks about when you take a simple auto crash case, that ultimately the defense comes down to that a human value isn't worth really all that much. If you've been injured, they didn't have much of a great life anyway, or they weren't making much money anyway, and just kind of those human values are not part of the calculus. And so he was talking to these students, trying to convince these super smart law school to come and do plaintiff's contingency work, civil justice work. Don't go for the temptation of the quick, I'm not going to say easy money because they work really hard, but the quick money of those firms. Can you speak about that? And I think the fact that you're able to fly over the Gulf of Mexico and see what could have been a barren wasteland if no one did anything about that pollution, and flying over the Raritan River in New Jersey and seeing what that's become as a direct result of your labor and the tremendous risk that you put into those cases in terms of time and cash, and just what your experience has been like that, and kind of at this stage in your career, how that makes you feel, and any advice that you can give to people that are thinking of becoming lawyers, or many people that are thinking in any profession in terms of that, doing good, but also doing well for yourself.
I think one thing, well, two things. One, there's a ton more work to do. Like, I've never been jealous or competitive with other people because there's so many wrongs in the world that need fixing.
You once said there's always a scam out there. You can always find a scam in terms of the consumer cases.
And there's always an environmental problem that, New Jersey still has a long way to go to get back to some of the natural resources that its people are entitled to. And that's work that's going to take decades still. I will say the shocking thing to me is that now we had 2 clerks from Harvard this year work at the law firm. They now have like a plaintiffs, they have an environmental club or environmental, whatever they call it. But they also have a future plaintiffs lawyers group, as does Stanford. I don't know about other schools, but I mean, the consciousness is changing. People do sit there and say, you know, I'm not saying anything bad about Paul Weiss. I like Paul Weiss. I have some friends there. Tried a case against them, but they were representing Exxon. And, you know, kids at Yale boycott Paul Weiss because they do work for Exxon. And I think it's good to have values and to use them. I mean, when Rick Friedman and I were young law students, I had a professor of civil procedure, Abe Chase, and every year, he's passed away since, but every year he would have like a social event, like all the first year kids in his section. And I don't remember if Rick was in my section or not, to be honest with you. It's almost 50 years. 45. I'm not that old. But Abe Chase said, you know, the problem with you, referring to my generation, is the problem with you guys are that you only got here because you're workaholics and you wanted to get an A. So, you tried to get, your parents would inculcate you in elementary school to do well. So you'd go to a good middle school or private school. And then in high school, it was, oh, where are you going to go to college? Little did he realize that I just tested well and didn't worry about all this. But that's another story. Yeah. But he says, and then you get into, you want to go to a Harvard or Yale, and so you go through Harvard or Yale, you work like a dog, and then suddenly life begins, and you know, there's no A pluses in life, but you all think that if you go to the big firm, Wachtell, Lipton, the one you mentioned, Paul Weiss,
Cadwalader, Wickersham, and Taft.
Yeah, I think Cadwalader actually, first year, because they weren't doing as well with recruiting as some of the other firms, Cadwalader actually sent a letter to my house in Vineland, where my dad, who I don't think he ever made more than $15,000 a year, Cadwalader is like, we're prepared to pay you as a first-year law student $1,000 a week to work for us in New York. That's a lot of, back then it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And you know, it was weird. It's actually kind of weird that you get a letter like that knowing that your dad doesn't earn that much in a year, you know? But he was proud of me and he was happy, and I didn't take the offer because I didn't want to hang out with people called Cadwalader, Wickersham, and whatever. I didn't think I'd fit in real well. And so in any event, he said, so you want to get that A plus in life, so you want the firm with the big name. And then once you're there, maybe that's enough to sustain you, but maybe at some point you start to worry about, why am I here? What's satisfaction in life? He says, so then you start having affairs and drinking too much and this, which is why I made the drinking comment. It's like, yeah, I could have been that guy, I guess, if I was so enamored with what other people thought of me in terms of, oh, see, I'm at this fancy firm, so I'm a man of some importance.
Yeah.
I mean, it never mattered to me. I mean, to me, it was initially problem solving, loved problem solving, wanting to do some good, thinking that I should leave the world a little bit better than I started. I think kids nowadays are getting that. I mean, some of these kids that I've talked to at Harvard, like, you know, I said about 2 years ago, I said, you know, we're based in New Orleans. A lot of our people are Tulane people just because.
Proximity, it's right there.
Yeah, and whatnot. But I said, you know, we really got to reach out more. Stanford, Harvard, not because they're better, but, you know, it's something that, I mean, I'll tell you, law clerks are great. I mean, the ones that open up to you have tremendous ideas. Maybe you reject 7 out of 8 of their ideas, but you're just hearing a different conversation. And like, kids who care about values are good kids to have around the office. And kids who learn to take ultimate responsibility. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of times you have young lawyers who come in and they're like, oh, is this okay? Is this okay?
Yeah.
And at some point you really want to say, it's okay, but you can't go through life thinking somebody's going to check your work
Right.
on everything, because it's not possible. There's going to come a day when I'm in trial and you're going to be handling something else,
Yeah.
and you got to develop your own internal guidance as
Yeah.
to what is good work and not good work. And but I have seen change, and every time I've gone to Harvard to give one of these talks that they ask you to give, mostly because I think they want money when you die or something.
Or now, if possible.
Yeah. You know, you go to these talks, and there are a lot of kids, and they're just like, how can I do that? You know, and it's like, it isn't that hard. I think it's harder to go to some place you don't like, where you don't like the people, where you think they're pencil necks or whatever, and you know, I think it's almost harder to fit in someplace you don't belong. Like my niece, she went to work for a big firm in New York, Skadden Arps. I mean, she was sleeping under her desk
Yeah.
2-3 nights a week.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy. I'm like, what the hell? You know, I mean, that's a lot harder than hanging out a shingle. And, you know.
When I worked at a firm in New York, I graduated law school, I clerked for a year, and I was supposed to work at a firm in North Jersey. It was, I think it would be considered a large firm. There was 50 lawyers, but it wasn't one of those big firms. The funniest thing is I always tried to get in those firms that you're talking about, and I had some interviews, but I never got the jobs, and I tried so hard to get those jobs. I would interview, and I really wanted one of those jobs to make that money quickly. And every day I thank God I never got those jobs. I never got it. But it's funny because when I worked, so I was supposed to work at this firm in North Jersey, but the day before I was started, they asked if I could work at their New York office instead. They said, it'll just be temporary. So I was in Monmouth County, New Jersey, commuting to the city, and I actually slept in the office a couple times. I actually asked my boss if it was okay if I could sleep in the office because I was working late. By the time I got home, I'd be back. So it wasn't a cultural thing there, it was a me thing. But that's pretty funny. I mean, they have like sleeping rooms and stuff at those firms sometimes.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, I guess when I went into law school, so I remember in philosophy grad school, one of my a guy a year ahead of me was like, do you know City University pays new faculty less than new firemen? And I was like, so? I mean, to me, I guess growing up poor, you know, $17,000 a year didn't seem like a bad salary, you know? I mean, I never went to law school and fantasized about salaries. I mean, people would send me letters like this, or you'd hear people like second year, they were all like taking these clerkships at firms. And I remember I was at this one firm. I did get so the first year I worked as a research assistant to a professor, which was great. Second year I did work at a Washington firm, and I'm there, and they had a Friday afternoon social thing, you know? It's like you had to go, I mean, bad enough you had to hang with these people. They wanted to like party with you in their free time. But it was all very...
Anything but go home to their...
Yeah, their terrible existences. So this one guy says to me, and I was drinking wine, a beer. I was having a beer. At that point, all I drank was beer. I didn't even drink wine or hard liquor. The guy's like, have you tried the Johnny Walker Black? This is a white guy. He's like, have you tried the Johnny Walker Black? I guess now they have a different colored Johnny Walker for really fancy. But back then, black was fancy. And he says, have you tried the Johnny Walker Black? I said, no, I'm drinking beer. He's like, well, that's the only black you'll ever see in here.
Oh, God.
And the whole room was white male, you know? And I'm like, fuck you, you know? What the fuck? You're not paying me enough to listen to this shit.
The fuck you was that.
Was I allowed to say that?
No, that fuck you reminded me of the mediation we had with Cooper Tire, where you told the lawyer, You're like, fuck you, you make bad tires. And they were all recoiling
Oh
back.
no, I told him fuck you.
You actually did, wow. Yeah.
I just was like, you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't fire me.
Good
But
for you.
they certainly didn't invite me back.
Yeah, good for you.
No, it was just like, what the hell? I mean, where does that come from? You're an educated man. You're wealthy and successful. And it's like, you're stupid enough to make a comment like that?
Yeah.
I mean, what, you just think because you're paying us this outrageous summer salary, we're going to do whatever, you know, we're just going to pretend like it's okay? But the truth is, a lot of those people do. People from my generation went into firms, and they sucked that stuff up,
Yeah.
you know, and without rebelling or, you know, it just, and everybody was like, and all the kids, none of them were like, oh, you were right to say that. They were all like, oh, you've ruined your career.
Oh, God.
You'll never get a letter they'll never write a nice letter. You can't get a reference or anything.
Yeah.
You better not tell people you worked this summer. Say you were on a Buddhist retreat or something. I don't even know what a Buddhist was at the time. And, but, you know, just, I don't know. I mean, Abe Chase was really right. You know, if all you care about is getting an A+ in life, you're going to go to the firm that you think is going to do that for you. And the great thing since those days are that I feel the younger generation does try to live its values a little bit more. As a practical matter, I've noticed in the last couple of years that I've also hired more kids who've taken some time off between between college and law school, and actually run something or done something.
Yeah.
You know, I find that you know, the thing with law, it all comes down to exercising good judgment under the circumstances.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to say F you in court.
No,
okay?
no.
You know, but you may in a meeting.
You might say
that you
chicken
met.
shit, though, you know?
Yeah, you might. In fact, it would probably help. But, you know, the younger generation, I think, does give us hope that values become more important in the practice of law. I mean, I'm not denigrating every big firm and every partner in a big firm. I'm just saying that, you know, the culture's bad. I mean, I remember I was trying a case against one of these big firms, and this kid who'd been like, I guess he was in charge of all the witnesses. He was always at deposition things, and he would object to every single question. Had no idea what was going on. And we finally ended up in court together, and he was part of a trial team. It wasn't like they would let him try the case. And it was actually his first trial, and because all they ever do is push paper at some of these places, not all of them, but this place. And, you know, he couldn't lay a foundation to save his life. And, you know, it was, after a while I realized I was enjoying it a little too much when he had witnesses.
At the trial.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't. So he lay a foundation. He didn't know how to ask a basic question, which would permit him to ask the next question. Basic stuff.
like I had this guy had written 3 books on the stand, a groundwater pollution case, and so he walks up to the guy. I mean, this is somebody who probably billed 2,000 hours a year, 3,000 hours a year. He goes up to the guy and he's like, "Well, didn't you write this book?" You know. And the guy said, "Yeah, I've written 3 of them, you know, one of which I contributed a chapter to. But in any event, on forensic, environmental forensics." And he's like, "Well, let me read what you said." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of times, you know, obviously you don't make an objection every time, but I remember all the years of him like making me wait out in the hallway. Instead of getting comfortable until, you know, the witness. And I was just like, "Yeah, Judge, I think I'll object now." And Judge's like, "Sustained."
Yeah.
And the guy just stood there like a deer in the headlights looking at the judge like, "I want to read something he wrote." And the judge is like, "Yeah, there's a way to do that, a way not to do that."
So you have to establish the foundation. You have to show that it's relevant or demonstrate that it's related to something in the case.
Right, or that he said something different.
Well, that would be impeaching with a prior inconsistent statement. You have to first nail him down to the statement that he made here.
That's what, right, exactly. And it was probably his
Otherwise,
intent.
it's not relevant or anything.
I mean, yeah, it was, his intent was probably impeachment.
He probably had something good in there.
You know, but he had, you know, the witness has to say the opposite or something inconsistent.
Right.
And so 2 or 3 times he falls on his face, and the judge, at first the judge waited for me to object, then I just stopped objecting, and the judge was like, and then there was a break, and they must have like told him something, and so he like read something that he wanted the guy to say, oh no, I don't agree with that. Do you agree with the following statement? Which is in your book.
Yeah.
I mean, he couldn't even like kind of get the point in a normal conversation.
You have to be careful with that though, because if the jury thinks you're picking on the kid,
it was a judge trial.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay.
It was a judge trial.
Okay. Yeah.
And let me tell you, this is in Burlington County.
Yeah.
Great judge, Judge Hogan, and he was specially appointed by the Supreme Court to hear this trial. He had already retired, I think, and I mean, I never saw these New Yorkers were just like talking down their nose at him. All of them, even the young ones who didn't know, hadn't made their bones or anything.
Talking down to the judge.
Oh yeah.
Like, Judge, don't you know this is what it is and this is what the law says? Yeah.
I mean, it was just, I mean, it was like, so he had already been inappropriate with the judge, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, you see this stuff and it's like, what are you thinking? So anyhow, so then he finally like reads this thing, and my expert's like, oh, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And so then he didn't have his. He says, "Well, let me show you your book." And I was like, "No, you don't get to go to the book until he disagrees."
Right. You can't cross him with a prior consistent statement.
Yeah, but you know, it was so bizarre. I mean, I remember a different lawyer, different partner. Like this guy was already a partner. Different lawyer comes in. And so we had some maps of what Bayway looked like before all the pollution and stuff. And so these are ancient documents.
There's an evidence rule about that.
It turns out there is. So they object. And I'm like, ancient documents.
You said ancient documents?
I think I used the number of the rule.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to coach them too much.
Yes, exactly.
I said, rule, I forget what, I want to say 1008.
Yeah, it ain't 403 or 404, that's for sure.
Yeah,
It ain't one of the normal
It's
ones.
something in the thousands.
Yeah.
And I think it was a hearsay. Is it a hearsay? Well, in any event.
It's a hearsay exception,
Right.
ancient documents.
So
Just like business records.
they said, well, we'd like to address that with the court. And so I have a historian on who's talking about what the pre-existing pre-pollution conditions were and using these maps from the 1840s and all. And there were not, there was no reason anybody would lie back then anticipating that it would subsequently be polluted and, Exxon, whatever. But so she said something. She said, I can address the court on this. So it's like, okay, another stupid speech.
Yeah.
And they bring out a lectern, a dog and pony show, and like slides and like screens and like, I thought the judge I think probably expected they were going to just argue for a few minutes and then I would respond and then we would go back to the witness. And it was like this whole production, like 8 people came out with this lawyer who, said that the ancient document rule denied them the right of cross-examination, ergo it was a violation of constitutional due process, and they were prepared to take this to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. but they couldn't say it like that. It had to be like, it was like 40 minutes into it. I'm like, passing out in my chair, like, oh my God. But again, it's like, be an iron butt. I mean, they're not winning any points with the court on this.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
it's just stupid.
Yeah.
So the judge said, Mr. Cantor, would you care to respond? And I think he was hoping I'd say no. And I'd just say, so I said, look at that. I said, the evidence book behind you is promulgated by the Supreme Court of New Jersey. And in it, there's room 1008. So why don't you just follow it and we'll call it a day.
Hold on 1 second. We're back.
Yeah, no. So a lot of times in trial, let people do stupid things.
Yeah,
It won't hurt you.
Hey, before we go, I have to ask you about, you spent some time on Indian reservation, the American Indian reservation, and I think you did some litigation for them or something. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I always found that fascinating.
Yeah, over the years I've done some work. I think I told you about. So Stuart Udall was JFK's Secretary of the Interior. He had a son and a nephew subsequently served in the U.S. Senate from Arizona and New Mexico. He was living in Santa Fe, and because I was doing a lot of pollution cases, he asked me to come out. I ended up spending a year on the Navajo reservation. They had a lot of natural resources, uranium, oil and gas, et cetera, but nobody cleaned anything up. Remember earlier I talked about, in Louisiana, the plant had 155 times the amount of emissions in upstate New York. I mean, it was even worse on the Navajo reservation, and some other tribal areas I've been. But I thought we did some good. Tribes are difficult clients because, as power changes, it's very, very frequent. But so one of my favorite cases was for the Celilo YM up in the Pacific Northwest. Literally, the federal government wanted to relocate the whole tribe so that it could build an Indian heritage museum where their homes were. In other words, let's just put the nails in the coffin right now. But I did learn some Navajo, like Yate, that's hi, goodbye, kind of like shalom for Jews. Doya Shona Bilagana, like the Navajo believe in consensus, and they have like 150 some chapters. That's just local villages. And so when the Attorney General wanted to do something, you would very respectfully go to all these chapters and try to get consensus, which is very important to them. And it's good. I learned a lot, but so my shtick. I mean, everybody has a shtick, but my shtick was get in front of the room and just say, "Oh, it's so nice to be here at whatever the chapter was called." Grandma sitting in the back there. She greeted me when I came in. Doya Shona Bilagana, she says, which means head for the hills, white devil is here. That was crack the room up. Wait, hang on, let me just turn this off. Sorry.
Hey, Oscar, could you just lower the air a little? It's getting hot in here.
Oh, I forgot to turn the ringer off. Sorry. Like Doya Shona Bilagana, and it was really interesting. The cultural differences were very interesting. I mean, the Navajo have this expression, may you walk in beauty, and it's all about the harmony. And I recently traveled to Japan, and they had the same sort of view of the world. And like, you'd be like, well, we have to clean up this site, and people would ask you questions, which is like, well, where will you bury it? Well, I guess someplace where children are not playing by the stream and water is there. And they're like, oh no, we got into trouble by letting them dig on our property to begin with, the uranium tailings. And so would have discussions about, well, this land is sacred. Okay, it's been defiled, but can we really should we dig it up and then bury it again and maybe cause more mischief? It's very interesting. I mean, I learned a lot from them. I think I became a little bit more spiritual too because of it, and more patient. Like, I remember, so when you're young, you're often very vain and arrogant, and I probably was a little bit, you know, Mr. Harvard Law, doing environmental cases. And I remember going to one meeting with the Attorney General and the President, and this guy's there. He was like a medicine man, but I didn't know that. He was just a guy. You know, nobody wears suits or anything.
President of what?
The Navajo Nation.
Oh, okay, of the tribe.
I guess this was like a decisional meeting of
Yeah.
what we were going to do. And they all loved Stuart Udall, you know, and so I was ahead just by being his guy. This guy walks up to me, puts his hand on my heart, and he says, "This is a man with a good heart." And I was sitting there thinking, why did I give him a copy of my resume? I mean, if all I had to do was have a good heart, that's fine, you know? But I'm sitting there talking for 15 minutes about, I won this case, I won that case, you got to hire me, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know, it's very humbling. And it makes you realize that at the end of the day, it's just your heart. And whether you can do good, but provide for your family as well, and make your leave your community better than when you started.
Yeah.
I mean, what else could you ask for?
Cool. All right, Allan. Listen, I really appreciate it. You've been super generous with your time today. You know, I really appreciate that. And as a citizen of New Jersey and someone that likes to enjoy our tidally flowed areas and our open spaces, I appreciate what you did on the natural resource damages claims and doing your part to clean up the state. So thanks.
You're welcome. It's always, I love New Jersey. It's where I was raised, and you know, my cousins are all here, and anything I can do to make New Jersey better, I'm happy to do.
Yeah.
You know,
the seasons are nice when the seasons change. You know, when you're in the, you know, you can be in a tropical place, but it's always hot and always. So it's nice to have the change of seasons in Jersey.
yeah. New Orleans has just one season. Well, they have two seasons: hot and hurricane, which is nice, but not that nice sometimes. But
right.
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.